Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar where we're going to be hearing stories from our broadband infrastructure program. Just a quick reminder, actually, next slide, please. Just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, to please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom application, and we'll get to them during the Q&A portion of this webinar. And a reminder that the presentation, along with the transcript and recording of this webinar, will be available on Broadband USA under the past events section of the website. You can expect to see that within the next 48 to 72 hours. We'll also email it to all the people who've registered for this webinar. Next slide, please. My name is Julia Polidindi. I'm a broadband program specialist at NTIA, and I get to work across all of the grant programs that NTIA is administering. And today we're going to be featuring the Broadband Infrastructure Program. We'll have our director, Jeff Jordan, kick us off with an overview of the project and how it's been progressing since it kicked off about 2 years ago. And then we'll be hearing from three of our grantees, Kendra Jo Grindle, who's Senior Manager for Community and Regional Partnerships at the Maine Connectivity Authority, BJ Tanksley, who's Director of the Office of Broadband Development from the Missouri Department of Economic Development, and Kyle Brown, who's Deputy Director of Broadband Expansion and Accessibility of Mississippi. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of our agenda. As I mentioned, Jeff will kick us off with an overview of the program, and then Kendra Jo will talk to us about Maine's application. BJ will present on Missouri's, and then we'll hear from Kyle about Mississippi's application. Then we'll have a little bit of a moderated discussion, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff Jordan, the Director of our Broadband Infrastructure Program.
Thank you very much. You can move on to the next slide, please. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those of you out on in the Western time zones. I want to spend a couple minutes for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with the Broadband Infrastructure Program, also known as BIP. It was awarded 2 years ago. The grants were awarded 14 different grantees, $288 million. So compared to some of the other programs, rather small in size, but very important nonetheless. We have 14 grantees in the program, all the way from working from east to west, from Maine, an island in Maine, all the way off to the island of Guam, where we're doing some projects out there. The goal of the program was to deliver broadband access to very rural communities. To give you an idea of some of the rural nature of this, I think when we did the math a couple of months ago, we found out that one of our projects, the nearest interstate, was 110 miles away, and the average distance between the project areas with this grant and all these different projects and a population center of more than 20,000 people was 20 miles. So these are very rural in nature, which has some of their own challenges, of course, getting done. There were 240 applicants, a total of $2.8 billion in requests, and of that, we funded $282 million of those. And what we were looking for with those applications primarily was the greatest number of households served. The service area is obviously smaller than 50,000, obviously, but that was it. And then how cost effective they could be delivered to that. So next slide, please. Kind of a graphic illustration of where the project areas are, as I said, all the way from Guam to Maine. There are 14 different grant recipients, and they total 64 different unique projects underway with those grants. As of October 31st, there were 42 projects that were under construction. That number is actually up now. It's 47 projects that are under construction. We do expect 5 or 6 more of those to kick off within the next 90 days. To date, we had, or as of October 31st, and that was the formal reports that the grantees submitted, there are 33,000 homes passed at that time. Now that number is actually up over 50,000, and well over 1,000 households served to date as well. And we've got at least 1,180 miles of fiber laid. A lot of that is aerial, so laid might be a little bit of a misnomer. But the projects are really, really going full speed right now. Most all the grantees except one have a project that's under construction. Some projects have already completed. We'll hear from BJ later on. His state's really led the way in starting the construction and then completing some of those projects as well. Next slide. All right, so with that, I want to pass it off to Kendra Jo so she can talk to us about their project in Maine and what they've accomplished and some of their highlights. Kendra?
Thanks, Jeff. You can go ahead and advance next slide. As Jeff and Julia mentioned, I'm Kendra Jo Grindle. I'm the Senior Manager for Community and Regional Partnerships with the Maine Connectivity Authority. And we couldn't be more excited about this funding within our state, as well as the progress of these projects. Next slide. I'm going to focus mostly in this presentation on some of those highlights within our communities and the successes, as well as some of the innovative ways that they've conquered some challenges that have come up, or just some changes that have happened in their connectivity landscape as they've been deploying. But first, I'm going to talk just briefly about the Maine Connectivity Authority and kind of where we fit with this, recognizing that the original awardee was the Connect Maine Authority. So a lot has changed since we applied for this grant award. Next slide, please. The Maine Connectivity Authority is a quasi-governmental entity that was stood up in 2021 with the recognition that the state of Maine, given where we were in broadband planning and expansion, as well as the federal funding that was coming down and the opportunities that existed, really wouldn't be able to be as nimble as they should be to meet the goals that the state had put forward, especially on a rapid timeline that we're looking at currently. And so as we kind of projected out and talked across the private and public partners that are very active in the state of Maine, it was very clear that there needed to be a new entity that was stood up to be able to adapt and grow. And we've grown quite quickly. We're a staff of about 20 in 2 years, working across digital equity, workforce, and putting a lot of capacity behind BEAD, as well as other grant funding opportunities to ensure that we're meeting our goals as outlined here. Next slide. And we do all of this with a priority around places, projects, and people. And here it kind of says competing priorities, and I would say that that's true, and how these overlap, where it can be difficult, and there needs to be quite a bit of innovation and critical thinking across the space to be able to balance meeting the urgency and access of place while also looking at affordability and digital equity and ensuring adoption. And that's really where the state of Maine has been a leader with bridging the divide between private and public and ensuring that all parties in the space are at the table as early as possible to move these projects forward and get the residents of Maine the connectivity they need now and into the future. Next slide. And just a quick capture on this, the Maine Connectivity Authority. So we have completely taken over the work and the body of work and goals of the Connect Maine Authority. And so we've been in the position to manage this grant funding in the first year, recognizing that we were at the time a staff of 1 to eventually maybe 4 or 5. We did have some additional project management for this grant funding, as we call it, the Mountains to Sea funding from the NTIA Broadband Infrastructure Program. And we still use some outside project management support, particularly as we're looking how we can build systems across all of our grant funding and create consistencies as a grant making and grant managing organization. But as we've built more of that grants team internally, we've been able to really pull a lot of that in capacity inside of our organization to really streamline these operations and create efficiencies. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of success and growth within this program over the last 2 years. Next slide. The NTIA BIP funding is one critical and integral part of our funding and programs. And I wanted to give a quick snapshot of the work that we've been able to do within the last 3 years as an organization. We have multiple infrastructure funding streams, from wireless pilots and trial projects through to line extensions and leveraging middle mile. The Mountains to Sea funding or program that we see through this funding has been a true bellwether, both for the infrastructure programs that we have been utilizing capital projects funds for, but also ahead of BEAD. It's been a major shift in our partner landscape, particularly on the private side, to adjust and adapt from state funding and the state processes that they saw with Connect Main Authority in the past to where we are today, and the capacity and oversight that we have to both adhere to the federal guidance, but also distribute these and steward these funds in an appropriate and effective and efficient manner. So it's been very much a learning process. And as you'll see in the next slide, we can go ahead and shift to that. We are seeing our projects be at very different stages throughout at this current time. So we have a few projects, particularly with one large provider in our state, Consolidated Communications, really leading the charge and was able to deploy their infrastructure quite rapidly and get through field validation and verification and move into closing. And it's given us the opportunity to learn from those projects ahead of the remaining projects within this program. We have another that's currently in that validation and verification stage, and we've been able to, with each kind of project moving forward, tweak and adjust and adapt and give feedback into NTIA and the great work that their team does to hear and adapt their guidance as well, and their support of us. And then we have our last 3, which are our municipally owned projects in partnership with Axiom Technologies to operate, that are in stages of both build and working through make ready. And so I'll get into a couple of those as I highlight these communities, but this is just where we currently stand and the number of connections that we are seeing lit up through this program over the next year or two. Next slide. Overall, for this program, we have seen a great deal of just momentum and sustained engagement in a state where it was years and years of planning and very small infusions of funding. The previous authority, had $500,000 to give out on an annual basis, or somewhere around there, $500,000 to $750,000. And so those small little infusions of funding, they had a lot of impact in very narrow focused areas. And so 1, 2, 3 communities at a time, where this funding opportunity was a really great opportunity to bring communities and private partners together, and some of our regional partners as well, that are working in the nonprofit space, to both celebrate and kind of reinvigorate folks that have been working at this for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It reinforced that community partnerships are key and a real cornerstone of broadband expansion in Maine. As we see the projects, even the private-owned projects, move forward, it's been on the shoulders of a lot of community work and engagement that got them to there, and that we're continuing to see adoption rates and take rates increase as we see those connections made, neighbors talking to neighbors, and communities coming together around what does it look like to actually leverage this infrastructure that we've worked so hard to get. The field validation process, as well as moving through our grants management process, we've had a lot of learnings, and we've been able to adapt and adjust as we both move through this program and increase our internal capacity and team. So using this as an opportunity to learn and test and build that with our partners and awardees, who we know many of them will come back for funding ahead of BEAD as well. or with BEAD funding as well. So trying to look at that guidance, look at those opportunities, and put some of those pieces in place now. And then the one thing that I feel like lots of these calls speak to is just the barriers that we're seeing in infrastructure implementation, and how we have the ability to reduce those early on. So getting through make ready and poll process, as well as workforce. So next slide. Just want to highlight a few of our communities that have been at the forefront of some of this work. The Blue Hill Peninsula, we had an incredible gathering to kick off the installation of this multiple town kind of regional peninsula-wide project with Consolidated Communications. All of their connections have been made and they're entering into project closure. And they have been really addressing what it looks like for end users to access the infrastructure and starting to be at the forefront of bridging infrastructure deployment and digital equity ahead of our digital equity work. And what does it look like for communities to transition from infrastructure planning into digital equity preparedness and readiness? Next slide. Idaho is the island that was mentioned off the coast of Maine. All of their on-island work is complete, and that was definitely an innovative shift within their design and plan to get everything done on island when it was feasible and timely. With the barge, with seasonality and boat traffic, it was an opportunity to get everything done on island when they could. And seeing that infrastructure and the community engagement over the last 5 years has led to a 94% take rate in pre-subscriptions. And so a community that's just really showing that they are ready for when they are able to move forward and light up their network. Next slide. The last community that I want to highlight is the town of Washington. And it was another opportunity to show the power of community and partnership. We came together for a broadband festival to bring the community into the fold around this broadband project. Into the NTIA BIP funding was really the catalyst for this community to lean in on municipally owned. And they are right next door to another NTIA BIP project in Somerville. And so moving forward, having ongoing collaboration between those two communities as they both build but also create efficiencies around connections and residential readiness for installation and digital equity deployment. Next slide. These last two slides before I wrap is just to kind of show you how we are talking to our stakeholders and the public at large around both what the problem is, but how we're progressing on the solution. So this map is on our homepage at mainconnectivity.org. As you scroll down, it's a heat map that continues to get updated as the FCC maps are updated. And it just shows kind of where we are in real time in terms of locations and service across the state. And it's based around that density and those numbers. And if you go to the next slide, there's another layer, a page to this map that allows us to provide updates around funding. So this one in particular is a NTIA BIP project, and it just allows us to show where the funding is going, how many subscribers, and what the status of that is. So it's just constant communication and trying to make sure that even, your neighbor down the street could go to a page and see actively where this funding is being deployed. And so with that, the next slide is just my contact information if folks have questions. And I will hand it back to Julia to move us forward to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra Jo. Our next speaker is going to be BJ Tanksley with the Missouri Department of Economic Development. Just a reminder, and Macy just put it in the chat, if you have any questions for our speakers during the Q&A, if you can please drop them into the Q&A box within your Zoom app. And we will pass it along to BJ.
All right. Thank you, Julia. I think we can jump to the next slide. I am BJ Tanksley, the Director of Missouri's Office of Broadband Development. Very excited to be joining you today and to talk a little bit about our office and what we've been able to do working with NTIA and specifically the BIP program. I'm sure we'll get to the first Missouri slide here in just a minute, but that's really no problem. The Office of Broadband here in the state is relatively new. It was reestablished following, the previous funding opportunity. It was reestablished in 2017. At that time, our first new director, Tim Arbeiter, were here and was running really an office of one when it came to the Missouri Office of Broadband. At that time, we had an office, spent a lot of time that was working on promotion and talking about broadband and the issues specific to it, but really didn't have a lot of funding available. So for a couple years, that was the situation. We were out talking to communities and visiting about the need for broadband and driving that want and helping to answer questions about federal funding partners and opportunities that were largely coming completely through the federal government. And then in about 2018, the Missouri legislature established the Missouri Broadband Grant Program, and then a year later funded it. And that was 2020, when our office, still an office of one, I wasn't here at that time, ran a $5 million grant program. So similar to what Kendra Joe was saying, we've come a long way in just a short period of time where it was a small office with not a lot of money to invest in broadband, but facing a state with a lot of connectivity issues. The state of Missouri is estimated to have at this point somewhere in the neighborhood of, and this is very rounded numbers, but 400,000 unserved and underserved locations across it. So knew it even at that time, $5 million sounded like a lot for our state to invest in general revenue, but there was a ton of work to be done. So they did all they could with that, made several thousand connections working with willing providers to do so, but didn't know what would come next. Soon thereafter, the office was able to facilitate some CARES Act funding for broadband, and then leading into ARPA, saw this NTIA BIP opportunity. At that time, the office actually did kind of somewhat creative and went out to the broadband community and said, hey, submit your applications for project areas that fit this BIP criteria. Rural areas, areas in need of service, and then submit your application to our office. And before we got here, they judged those applications. Scored them, and took the highest scoring ones to be a part of Missouri's application to NTIA for the program. And with that, we can jump to the next slide, because it really did lead to an exciting time where Missouri was a part of the process and was originally awarded $42.2 million. And I think it was 19 projects across the state working with 9 subrecipients. What you'll see is those numbers are slightly different from what I originally said. We were originally awarded to what you see here on the screen, and I'll get into that in just a few minutes here. But Missouri was thrilled to be awarded $42 million. This was the largest investment we could ever have hoped for. And we didn't know when we first originally, because this is kind of the transition from previous director to myself, between the submission of applications and the receiving of award was when I came to the office serving as new director in early 2022. So it was an exciting time. And then shortly thereafter to be able to announce this major award, making over 13,000 connections across the state. We were very excited about it and still are. But this was really a huge opportunity for our state, not only in making a big investment, but also the first steps as we started to really build out the Office of Broadband. We are now an office of 12 and going to be growing as we look over the next couple of months as we look to develop the BEAD program, but also an opportunity for our team to learn a lot. We went through the curing process with NTIA. We've been doing reimbursements and really working through that. We also invested in ARPA between then and now, where the state invested just over $261 million in broadband projects across the state. But BIP was truly the first step in that, working on 16 projects with 8 subrecipients. I will say at this point, we unfortunately lost one of our subrecipients recently. They decided to return those back to the state, and we will be descoping 3 of the projects. That's why you don't see 19 total projects instead of and only 8 subrecipients. But the projects we have are going forward very fast, and we're very excited about where we are. With that, we'll jump to the next slide. We have been involved in this and going forward pretty quickly here, making over 13,000 new connections. Our team here in the office has been very excited to be able to go out and see this work as it takes place. We try to visit with each subrecipient at about the halfway point, and then again as they are prepared for closeout, where we actually go out and drive around, see the actual deployment taking place, and then have the opportunity to visit with the subrecipients on a one-on-one basis. What are the challenges they're facing? What are they seeing as far as take rates? And what are they seeing coming next, whether it be with the BIP program or with future opportunities for funding through either our office, the BEAD program, or others. So we've been very excited about that and being able to see quite a bit of deployment as we've seen most of our projects are going along the track. I think we have 1 or 2 that are a little bit further behind, but the rest are moving very quickly here, as they were very excited about the opportunity to get started and get started quickly. And let's be honest, they saw it as the same way as we did, as a great opportunity to jumpstart into ARPA funding, which our office facilitated, and then what's coming next with the BEAD opportunity. We can jump to the next slide. As we said, these projects are all across the state. Unfortunately, this map is a little bit zoomed out to be able to take it all in, but you can see all the way from west of Joplin, all the way up to the northeast, where we're just across the river from Quincy, Illinois. So very excited about these projects. These truly are in some tough to reach areas. As you can see, if you look at it on a statewide map, they aren't gigantic, but they are meaningful projects connecting 13,000 locations and really able to connect some spaces. What you see there in the project north of Columbia is really filling in places where other programs weren't able to go. So you can now see that northern area north of Columbia in central Missouri is now going to be almost 100% complete when you consider a couple of RDOF awards that have taken place in that area, and then our award on top of that. We're able to have most of that county built out at this point, and really some energetic subrecipients in those areas. So we're very excited, and they've done a great job working all across the state. You may be a little bit cut off with this picture, but there's also a couple. That one, the one west of Joplin, fantastic project, tough to reach area. And then there's one right along the Arkansas border south of there, a big project working with a great provider and connecting a ton of locations in an area that otherwise wouldn't be likely to receive service. So we're very excited to see them moving forward quickly. And we can jump to the next slide. A little bit of highlights about our progress with our project so far. We have 10 projects that are nearing or close to complete with construction. They have done a fantastic job. Most of those working in kind of northeast Missouri, small size projects, big impact, but they knew that they were taking on projects that they could get done quickly. Another number of our projects, over the 4 more of those are above 50% or nearing completion. And we have 7 projects that are ready for closeout. Very excited. So we got a couple projects that are less than 50%, but above and beyond, most of them are moving forward very quickly. Our team has stayed very busy and has learned a lot, which will pay us dividends as we are working on ARPA and the BEAD coming, working through the reimbursement project or process. Both our subrecipients and the team has learned quite a bit about what do we need to ask for, and then also from the subrecipient side, what do they need to supply to us to have that certainty of what we're paying for and making sure we're doing that. You can see we've processed over 104 reimbursements at this point. The team is working very hard. I think our total award was around 20 million, and we have over half of that has been reimbursed, if I'm remembering correctly. So very excited about the progress we've been able to make with these projects. Really, as I get ready to conclude here, it was a great opportunity for the office. I was a brand new director just as we were getting ready to be awarded, and we were very excited to be able to do so. But as we look forward to it, it's really been a learning opportunity for our whole team, facilitating federal awards, which is exactly what we are now doing with ARPA and what we will be doing with the BEAD program, but also an opportunity to kickstart these locations. 16 different projects going to receive and 13,000 locations across the state, getting service to some tough to reach areas. Those subrecipients are now excited to take part and have won ARPA awards and will be taking part in the BEAD program and building from these project areas to serve even more and more. So it's been a great learning opportunity for us, the subrecipients, and our team, but also a great kickstart to what we're going to be doing, as Missouri is the third largest recipient of the BEAD program and will be facilitating over $1.7 billion in broadband awards. So it was a great opportunity. We really appreciate NTIA and their partnership, working through some of the tough conversations when unfortunately we saw one subrecipient step away from their project areas. But we're really excited about where we are. We're really thrilled to have the funding available and to get these Missourians connected as we continue our effort to connect all Missourians. And this has been a huge step in that direction. I'd be glad to answer any questions towards the end, but with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Julia.
Thank you, BJ. It's a great presentation. Next, we have Kyle Brown, with Broadband Expansion and Accessibility of Mississippi. And thank you for those who are dropping your questions in the chat. I see them come through and we'll get to them during the Q&A. But first, Kyle.
Well, thank you, everybody. My slide deck is not as lengthy as BJ's was. And so, but Beam, I guess next slide. One more. Yeah. So for Beam, which we actually weren't Beam at the time, applied for the BIP grant funds, and we were actually at the public utility staff. And so my boss, Sally Doty, and I and two other people had administered $75 million, which was matched dollar for dollar in CARES Act funding. And as we were working through that program, we actually got to meet quite a few of our internet service providers. And as the deadline approached for the BIP program, we had one of our providers call and beg, like, I can't find a government partner. Will y'all please help us? And originally our answer was no, because there was no broadband office in the state. And so finally, my boss reached out to our governor and said, yes, go ahead and apply. And so when we applied, we went through the curing process, a legislative session happened, and the next thing we knew, we had a $32 million grant and a brand new broadband office, and the $32 million grant moving with us. And so that was in September of last year. So our office is only about 18 months old. And so I remember actually calling Jeff and Rodrigo, our program officer, and being like, so our state's created a broadband office and we've got this grant. What do we need to do now? And so we went through, and it was a lot of emails back and forth with NIST and, you know, with everybody in the BIP program. We got our grant moved. And so our program has actually been a little bit slower to kind of get off the ground. You can move to the next slide now. Because our 10 projects or 12 projects in 10 counties, and kind of like with BJ, when you zoom out to your entire state, it makes it kind of hard to see just exactly where all the locations are. But we had to go through the process of actually getting the grant from one government entity into another governmental entity. And so it took a little bit longer than anybody had anticipated. And we actually went through the same process that BJ was talking about we actually had one of our internet providers actually backed out of the program, and that freed up dollars. And so then we also had to do the unfortunate thing of actually having to de-obligate funds, because a different internet provider actually came in and built on top of where their BIP project was going to be located. And so we actually talked to our recipients and, you know, asked them, because they were already part of the process, And so anyone that knows, like, submitting reimbursement requests, going through and working with your state SHPO office, to try and meet that September 2024 deadline, we wanted to make sure that it stuck with the people who actually knew the process, the people that had the relationships, that knew how to do reimbursement requests, who knew, how to do an RFP for proposals, all of those different types of things. And so we ended up taking, I believe it was 8 of our 32 million and reprogramming that into other into other projects. And so most of ours, because I actually saw this in the chat, most of our projects are actually buried and not aerial. I think we've only got 3 of our 12 projects right now that are aerial. And so we've just, really been working through this. And we actually, as part of our BEAD and digital skills and accessibility outreach, had been doing community engagement events. And so in the northwest corner of the state, it's kind of hard to see the county name, it's Tunica, but it's south of Memphis. And so we were doing a community engagement event, and basically an entire community showed up to the community engagement event. And they said, we don't have cell phone service, we don't have internet, the DSL line got cut years and years ago. People have got to come back from around the levee to make a cell phone call to call 911. And so we were able to, hear that for part of the BEAD and digital skills and accessibility programs. But then when we de-obligated those funds and we asked our providers, about 4 months ago, we were able to go back to that same community and say, look, we're from the government and we actually heard you, and we're actually going to be funding to actually bring fiber internet to your community. And so, being able to actually have those really good success stories has been really impactful for our office. And so, wanted to look at one of my notes. And so to date, actually one of the participants actually texted me this before I started. We're actually, we have reimbursed about 10.7 million of our 32 million to date. And so we actually have one project that is getting close to closeout, and we've got several that are nearing the end of construction and they're starting to turn customers on. And so we are really excited about that, and been working with Jeff on actually a problem that doesn't really occur very often in government programs. It's we actually have a project that's significantly under budget and they're wanting to know what to do with the funds. And so, what the BIP program has really done is been allowing Mississippi, and especially a really young office, to go into some of our very rural counties and really make an impact. Because, when we go up to, the Mississippi Delta, and people have never had internet before, now they've got gig fiber. So all of our projects were actually gig fiber, symmetrical fiber projects. And, they're asking you, can you help me set up my Roku TV? And so we've really had a great opportunity to connect with Mississippians. And then BJ kind of talked a little bit about this, but we've got a great team of outside accountants and auditors that we have monthly reimbursement requests. Those come in, those get reviewed. And then we've also got teams of outside engineers who actually go and do either biweekly or every third week, actually go to the construction sites to actually make sure people are doing exactly what they've told our state SHPO office. And, they're boring on the right side of the road, not the left side of the road. They're not going through wetlands, anything like that. And so, we get those reports, we're able to give them to our FPO, to where everybody really kind of knows what's going on with all of our projects. And so can't thank everyone enough. Jeff, you're always there to answer the phone. And so happy to answer any questions whenever that time comes.
Thanks, Kyle. I will punt it back to Jeff so he can ask each of our presenters about their program, and then we'll do it.
Thanks for those presentations. I enjoyed them. I hope everyone else did on the phone as well. I had, there's some really good questions coming in. I'm going to try not to steal those questions, although several of them were very adjacent to what I wanted to ask you about. Kendall Jo, I'd like you to, if you can, I know you had some really unique projects in Maine. Fiber off to an island certainly is unique, but you actually did some community engagement that activities that were a little unique as well. So, and I'm glad you got a chance to walk through that a little bit. But you've got projects that are completed, nearing completion. You've got your sub-recipient service providers have already started taking customers. Can you give us the folks on the call an estimate of what the take rate is on the subscriptions that are available now to because of the deployment? Is it
Sure.
50%? Where is it?
Yeah. So I'm going to give a rough estimate. I might follow up with just a harder number as I can, but I would say that it varies based on our projects. It also definitely varies based on the community engagement and the partnership at hand. So as I mentioned, we have a couple we do have a provider that does pre-subscriptions. And so when we're looking at Idaho, a community of less than 200 premises, and we're looking at a 94% pre-subscription take rate. That's pretty incredible for that island community. But currently we're looking at a 40 to 50% take rate across our projects.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
And then BJ, pivoting to you, I was wondering if you could share with us some of those obstacles that you and your office have overcome looking back, right? Because some of them were significant at the time. You probably think they were pretty small, but maybe you can share with everyone the obstacles that you encountered in managing a federal grant and all of those things that, that go along with all the strings attached.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Like I mentioned, I was a brand new broadband director at the time when we got awarded, and we were cheering from the mountaintops and ready to get started. And then we went through environmentals, and that took some time and some patience. And we were able to work through that. NTIA and your team helped a lot, but we worked with the providers and helped get questions answered and helped to funnel that. The next thing is, we had a tribal situation with historic that came up, and we were able to work with the provider to come to a conclusion that was suitable to everyone, where there's some additional oversight of the deployment. And so there were some kind of pre-start challenges from the beginning. And it was an eye-opener to the whole team of the types of small things that can impact us and the things we needed to be ready for. And I think it has made us more prepared as we've done ARPA. But also it gets all the way down to the details of someone who hasn't. And I try to think about, because we're dealing with ARPA funds at the same time as some of our BIP projects. But we've got a couple providers who haven't dealt with federal funding a lot. And then when it comes to working through the mechanics of a reimbursement, all of those can be small challenges at the time, but they're learning experiences for all of us. But it's been a great opportunity for our team to jump ahead, and I think it'll make us better when we get ready for the BEAD program.
Yeah.
I know I'm more intelligent when I answer questions about it when it comes to things like environmental review and historic and those types of things. I'm better at doing what I do now because we've been through it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're not the first person to suggest that BIP is a great trailblazer for some of the other infrastructure programs that are coming down. Kyle, tell us about, if you can, share with the team, and then we'll go straight to some of these questions that people online have submitted to us. What are the 2 or 3 lessons learned, things you wish you would have known before, but help the people understand what these lessons are?
I mean, a lot of kind of what BJ was talking about. We were a brand new office. We didn't, I think we probably went through 15 versions of curing. And what that curing has now allowed us to do was actually be really prepared for our CPF program, which, we've just made preliminary awards and has really helped us figure out what we want BEAD to kind of look like. And so, for our office, I think in 2 weeks, we're actually going to have kind of a CPF recap, because, what we've learned from BIP, and then what that transformed into CPF, and then what that's going to look like for Bede. And then, to what BJ was saying, having contacts in like the archives and history department, because, some of our projects, lo and behold, right when we were getting ready to move under construction, we were talking to our state SHPO office, and they uncovered like a 400-year-old body in the right of way. And so our state's very concerned about, making sure, because, I was saying about Coahoma County earlier, it's got got the most Indian burial mounds of any county in the state. And so I didn't know that before we started with BIP, but I do now. And I understand, working with those types of entities to where we're now working more in a partnership versus originally it's like, here's a whole bunch of projects that we need to get moving really quickly. And then, also, I mean, Jeff, this, I've become an expert on writing extension letters and filling out federal forms. I can fill out a SF 425 in my sleep.
Well, reporting is important. Nothing gets done without it. That's certainly a lesson that I think everybody has learned through the process. I'm going to try to tackle some of these questions we have online. We've got a couple of really good ones that have come in. And Kendra, maybe because you did such a good job of this in Maine, can you share with us why the service providers and why the towns, and what was the motivating factor for everybody to join you in this grant?
It's a great question. I think there's a few motivating factors, but one that I do want to highlight, and this was just really great thinking on Connect Maine's part, Peggy Schaefer and the team that she pulled together with Vetro and Tilson, was this funding opportunity put the administrative burden and the management on the state and not some of our smallest remote and rural communities, which is what we'd seen with other federal programs. And so recognizing that burden that we've seen some of our communities try to tackle and are still tackling multiple years past award, seeing that taken off of their shoulders. I mean, we're talking about communities of 100, 200, less than a few thousand, where so many hats are being worn at one given time, any given time, by the town manager or select board member. And so having the state do that administrative burden was really critical for our communities, for our small ISPs, some of our Maine-based and local ISPs to really compete and bring some more dollars in and leverage their own funding, as well as, a large-scale provider across the state. Gave them the opportunity to look regional and really look at where they were established across our state and where this funding would come in and leverage their private dollars to expand and cover universally, not just communities, but a regional area. So I think that is one of the biggest attractors for this funding. We also saw the state take an opportunity to say, where are we seeing communities that have been at this time and time again for a number of years that could really benefit from funding that fit the criteria, the very specific criteria at the time for NTIA BIP, and pull in some of those smaller communities where, if they had DSL, that was it. We didn't see cable. We weren't seeing, any interest in the private space, and having an opportunity where our connectivity landscape is very much connected as a network. Our private partners and communities are talking to each other. We see ISPs at community meetings, often municipal official meetings. And so there's a constant drum of communications occurring. And so it wasn't just communities raising their hand and saying, we want this funding. It was also providers looking at the communities that they were already engaged with, where they knew they could see the opportunity to increase the profitability of bringing these funds, and seeing that take rate increase. And just stepping back for a second on your last question, the town of Washington, the Broadband Festival that I mentioned in the presentation, and member from your team, Emily, you was able to join us for that on a beautiful day in Maine. But we saw a 20% take rate increase just from that community gathering. Bounce, like very family friendly, bounce house, potluck food, and not just the provider there, but also the subcontractors coming and being able to talk to folks and show them what the truck looks like, what the equipment looks like, what 2-inch conduit looks like, how to prepare their property when the time comes, and just breaking down some of those barriers that folks have around, okay, you're saying we're getting this fiber, but I don't know what it means and I don't know how to access it. So just a constant communication around that. So when funding like this comes up and becomes an opportunity for the state to lean in on, we usually have communities and partners in the space that are ready. And it was a quick turnaround on the application, and that really is because there was so much readiness in the space and planning already done.
Boy, Kendra, Joe, that is such a good answer. I'm glad we're recording this.
Oh, thanks.
I'm gonna play that back. I might put that in my Twitter feed today. That was very helpful. I'm gonna pivot to this other question. I've got first, BJ, real quick. Can you speak to what you're estimating some of the take rates are? We have a take rate skeptic joining us on our call here.
I haven't seen the recent numbers. I know most of them are very high. 40 to 50% is what I've seen estimated for take rates on these, because they're in broadband hungry areas. They're in areas where people are wanting service. These are areas where people have heard about what their neighbors have access to for a long time. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know they're estimating 40 to 50% at this point.
I appreciate that. So very touchy questions in here about some service providers backing out of some of the programs. I'm going to tackle them, and then I'll let BJ and Kyle, who've got some firsthand experience here, get in a little more details. One of the simple reasons we saw a couple service providers in different projects back away from the project was simply the fact that competition came in at the same time they were providing. And while as administrators of that county or that state office, you love to see competition, it's great for everybody. Those specific providers, very small, very rural service providers, just didn't think that was, even with the federal monies coming in, wasn't enough to convince them to stay with that project, and they prefer to use the cash they had to expand into other service providers. So that was one. The other was simply the federal reporting requirements were a little bit too strict or not to the service providers' liking. Something that was clear in the NTIA program, but there was some conversations that we may change our rules and regulations along the way, which NTI didn't do, and that caused the service provider to back up. Kyle or BJ, you want to take a little bit?
No, and I think you summed it up well. Missouri's was based more on the reporting guidelines. Most of our providers have been able to find a way to make that work and not be overly concerned with that. We are getting the reporting necessary. We are following up when we don't. But we did have a provider who felt like that bar was just higher than they were going to be able to do relative to the size of the award. We worked with them for quite a while to try to find solution, and ultimately just weren't able to. I will say, to NTIA's credit, they tried hard to try to allow us opportunities to reaward either those project areas or those funds. And it was Missouri's choice to just return those rather than reaward right here before this BEAD opportunity comes in the next year. That was our decision, just because of the small number of applicants and the project timelines. That was our choice, but NTI was very flexible with us to try to do that if we thought we could achieve it.
Thank you. Well, we've got just a couple minutes left. I don't see any other questions coming in. Macy or Julia, did I miss one of these? If so, feel free to jump in and ask the question.
Got a few.
We'll try to wrap it up.
We've got a couple questions in the Q&A. I'll grab a few since time we have left. This is for Maine and the Missouri offices. Are you working with unions at all to get your work done?
I'll go first. From Missouri standpoint, we judge applications based on their not on their style of hiring workforce, but on the fact that they are doing so fairly and equitably and paying good wages. but the type of hiring is completely up to the awardee or sub-grantee in this case.
Yeah, and I can add on that and kind of second it. We award grants directly to the communities and the internet service providers in the space, and they all kind of have a variety of labor standards and their own personal relationship with labor unions and local companies or regional companies. And so recognizing that all the federal grants that we work with have those Davis-Bacon requirements and federal labor standards that all awardees need to adhere to.
Thanks. Another one, this looks like it could be for any of you or all of you. How do you deal with different or conflicting program requirements, and how are you thinking about the possible end of the ACP program and its effect on your state's connectivity goals?
Nobody all at once.
I can get started a little bit. I would say that as I think while it has taken some time, I think I've appreciated our grants team and our organization has been able to work with our federal contacts across at NTIA, Treasury, and recognizing that while it does take up some time, we are seeing more opportunities for alignment ahead of BEAD, and these programs, while being that kind of, as I mentioned earlier, that bellwether that's kind of setting the pace for us and really showing us what barriers and changes need to be made, leading up ahead to this kind of big looming federal funding of BEAD and the requirements that are set forth. And I think with ACP, we've been really excited about the momentum around ACP, but as we develop consistent contracts across funding and trying to create consistencies within BEAD, CPF, and the programs that we have with NTIA BIP, reaching out and taking those goals of ACP and making sure the contracts are reflective of the goals and reflective of other opportunities that might be created, whether that's with the private partner and their own affordability programs, and how we can scale up those programs or right size fit them so that across the state we're not seeing this area because of this provider gets their own set of affordability and this area gets something different because they have a different provider. So kind of using ACP, whether it will continue or not, to set the tone for that contract guidance moving forward, and just ensuring that those goals and those standards are continued to move ahead.
Yeah, I think Kendra did a good job on both. I'll just say with ACP, with the differing guidelines, it is a challenge. It really is. We've got capital projects funds going on. We've got state and local fiscal recovery fund funded projects going on, and we've got NTIA BIP, and then we've got BEAD coming. As much as they can be drawn similar, we try to be customer friendly and do so. But it leads to a bit of a challenge and just more work. What it has taught us how to do is read closely and follow the guidelines. As far as ACP goes, everything we've done as states has had an affordability standard that we've all been asked to include in that. And we think it's good, right? What's the point of having access if people can't afford it? And ACP has been a big part of that. Without that, I think there's a lot of questions as what do states do to try to do that? There will still be that the internet needs to be affordable. There just may not be the assistance side of it as well. I think one of the big parts that will be a challenge to all states, and being honest with everyone on this call, is who qualifies and who doesn't. Whether or not there is that benefit part of ACP, ACP has always stood as or at least while it's been around, has stood as the clearinghouse for who was eligible and who wasn't eligible for that standard. Without that, it will be a challenge to the states with what we have done and what we will be doing to say who should be receiving that reduced price service and who should not. I think it's a real challenge for states, just being honest, with or without the actual benefit. There are challenges that we will face.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking all these questions. We are at the end of our webinar, and I want to thank Kendra Jo, BJ, and Kyle for their amazing presentations, and also for Jeff for leading our amazing BIP program and moderating our Q&A. Just a reminder to all of you that the recording and transcript and slide deck will be posted on Broadband USA under the past events page within 48 to 72 hours, and we'll also email it out to you. If you have any questions, you'll be able to find our contact information on our website and the email with the recording. But again, thank you, presenters, program director, and to you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.